The environmental issue I've decided to highlight in this video is biodiversity loss, particularly biodiversity loss in pollinators. Ireland has a diverse population of pollinators. Our island is home to many pollinating butterflies, hoverflies, beetles, moths, and most importantly, bees. The honeybee, Apis mellifera, is the most well-known bee in Ireland, but Ireland is also home to about 98 other species of pollinating bees. This number includes roughly 21 bumblebee species and almost 80 solitary bee species. Wild bees carry out the majority of pollination in the food-producing world. Unfortunately, despite their importance, the populations and numbers of these pollinating species are decreasing at an alarming rate. The diversity of pollinating species of bees has declined dramatically in the past 80 years. According to the results based on the findings of Fitzpatrick et al. 2006, the regional red list of Irish bees, in the past few decades, 2 species of wild bees have become extinct in Ireland. 30% of bees in Ireland are threatened with extinction, with 40% of species declining by more than 50% and 11 species declining by between 30 and 50%. This has a knock-on effect on the entire ecosystem as there are less seeds and fruits produced by plants that can be eaten by birds and small mammals. This disrupts food chains and can negatively affect all of Ireland's wildlife. This is of great public interest because this loss of pollinators will have severe economic impacts in the future. Roughly 85% of flowering plants rely at least partially on pollinators. This includes the majority of food-producing crops that people eat every day. There are many causes for this decline. Habitat loss due to agriculture and land use change is possibly the biggest threat to wild bees in Ireland. In the past, much of Ireland's hedgerows were destroyed to make room for tractors and machinery. Hedgerows are especially important to wild pollinators because they provide shelter, resources, and suitable sites for nesting. The destruction of hedgerows has led to habitat fragmentation. This causes populations to become isolated as they cannot travel across vast monoculture wastelands such as cereal crops and grass fields for grazing. The use of pesticides in farming has also led to the decline in pollinating insects. These insects are killed by topical exposure through chemical sprays and residues on flowers of crops that have been sprayed to prevent pest damage. They can also be orally exposed to pesticides through systemic seed dressings. Urbanization is also a cause for the decrease in pollinating insects. Suburban gardens and green spaces are encroaching on the countryside and are becoming more and more manicured. So here you can see a relatively new housing estate that was built in the past few years near where I live. Previously this land was all farmland. And as you can see now, there's little to no plants or flowers for pollinators. Here where I worked last summer at Ursanuchtaran, you can really see the manicured lawns and how there's not much room for biodiversity. Thankfully, the rest of Ursanuchtaran has been dedicated to promoting biodiversity by planting wildflower swards such as these and allowing meadows to grow. I'm mainly just showing this to show how a lot of big estates have large manicured lawns and big green spaces that aren't being used. The decline of wild pollinating insects can be stopped and reversed. This can be done by both creating and preserving natural habitats. Farmers need to stop destroying hedgerows and should be encouraged to create new green islands or bridges. This can connect hedgerows to each other to stop habitat fragmentation. Field margins are also very beneficial for pollinating insects. The creation and preservation of these areas will form suitable nest sites and will be sources of food for insects throughout the season. While the creation of hedgerows can be costly, the creation of other semi-natural habitats, such as wildflower meadows, can be just as effective. As you can see here, in Ursanuchtaran, Phacelia is being grown as a cover crop, which pollinating insects love. Homeowners should be encouraged to allow their lawns to grow out or to plant them up with flower beds. Growing your own fruit and vegetables is a great way to feed both you and wild pollinators and is way better for biodiversity than an empty manicured lawn. Wild pollinating insects will feed off the pollen and nectar of the crops growing, and in return pollinate them to provide you and your family with natural, fresh food. Homeowners would be surprised by how much food they can produce in such a small area. Double-flowered flowers, such as the begonias here, can make it difficult for pollinating insects to reach the nectar. Single-flowered flowers, such as these dahlias, are much more beneficial, and homeowners should be encouraged to grow these instead. The planting of wild native Irish flowers is also preferred. This is because many of these plants are at risk in the wild. Shown here is a relative of mine's garden. Farmers should be encouraged not to use as many pesticides and to carry out integrated crop management instead. Biological control can be highly effective and it promotes biodiversity. Pesticides should only be used as a last resort. Thanks to the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan, local authorities and neighbourhoods are starting to create pollinator zones in parks and green spaces. This is extremely beneficial for biodiversity. Areas such as Dunsany Castle have turned their grounds into nature reserves through rewilding. This should be encouraged to other large estate owners.